I'm Jim Zirin. Welcome back for more conversations. Laura Coates is with us. Laura Coates is a brilliant lawyer and a brilliant senior legal analyst for CNN. Once upon a time, she was a trial attorney in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice before becoming an assistant United States attorney in the District of Columbia, where the defendants and the victims she faced were disproportionately black or brown. In her new book, Just Pursuit, she treats the reality of working as a black woman within a legal system that is widely viewed as racist. Just Pursuit has been a New York Times bestseller. We're pleased to welcome Laura Coates to the program. Well,
thank you, Jim. I'm so glad I'm here. Nice to see you.
nice to see you, and congratulations on the book. It really, I couldn't put it down. It is presented in an interesting way. Rather than just a narrative or a history, it's a series of vignettes, of stories, of tales of the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia. So why did you decide to present your story this way?
Well, that's why I think your notion of once upon a time I was an attorney or a trial attorney is so apropos. I think when most people think about a lawyer's book, they don't necessarily want to pick up a book about a Supreme Court case, hear about the context surrounding it. I do love those books and enjoy them, but I wanted people to really come on a vicarious journey. On television, I talk about what the law is and how it can be interpreted. I rarely talk about how the law feels, how the pursuit of justice can oftentimes create injustice. And frankly, as everyone around the nation is so keen on speaking truth to power, they first ought to know what the truth is. And I've always found the most compelling way to do that, to help people to really view the world, is through storytelling, through the power of being able to empathize, to be able to be that fly on the wall, and to ask themselves the really pertinent questions, Jim, like, what would I have done? What ought to have been? And is there a gap between what is right and what is lawful?
Well, the book opens with what you just said. Everyone is talking about the opening line. The pursuit of justice creates injustice. Now, how does the pursuit of justice create injustice?
It sounds very counterintuitive, but it's mostly because we have this binary notion of what justice is. We think to ourselves, okay, justice will be served with a guilty verdict, or it will not be served if there's an acquittal of some kind, right? And so people think about the trial as really being the stop, the actual destination for justice. In reality, that's not the case. So when you think about it and you focus on it just that way, well, in many instances, the ends might justify the means in your mind, and that's not the case. In fact, I actually illustrate this point through the very first chapter when I talk about a victim of a car theft who reports a crime, only for me to learn that he has an active deportation warrant, and therefore, according to our office policy, must be turned over to immigration authorities and treated in a way as if he were the same type of criminal that had committed the crimes and had a rap sheet of other sorts as well. And so if you just think about justice and the pursuit of a conviction, you would think to yourself, well, whatever happens along the way, Jim, is irrelevant, quite inconsequential, because you're talking about a guilty or an acquittal of a verdict. But really, having to elevate this person to that level, really de-elevate this person to this level of a criminal, and thinking about the person and the obvious unfairness of putting someone in the obvious and horrible choice of either I report a crime and I face deportation, or I don't report a crime and I allow myself perhaps to be victimized again or create opportunities where others will be, or I allow this person to go unaccounted for and unchecked. It's really an impossible case that creates an injustice. And that's just but one example of how sometimes, even in our best efforts, we don't consider the collateral effects of our policies that impact our ability to view justice in a more holistic way.
Well, that was a heartbreaking decision to have to make, and it kind of reminds me of Dickens having Mr. Bumble say the law is an ass. But you had to turn him in. Law is the law, but it must have been heartbreaking to make that decision. And you write about it so vividly in the book. But what I just wanted to back up for a moment. You're working for the Department of Justice and the Civil Rights Division. You're on the side of the angels. You're prosecuting and vindicating voting rights. No one is asking you why you as a black woman are doing something like that. It's totally understandable. And then you decide to transfer to another part of the Department of Justice, being an assistant United States attorney in the District of Columbia, where most of the people, you said you could count them on one hand in 4 years. Most of the people are black, and those you could count on one hand are white. And then you find yourself questioning what you were doing, and someone actually, in another story, a black female defense lawyer confronts you and kind of pushes you around and says, what are you doing here? Tell about that. That was an amazing story.
Well, it's interesting because it was a foregone conclusion for so many people. If you are working in the civil rights division, on whose side you're on, then you're thrust into, and it was by my choice to go and be under the same umbrella of the Department of Justice, but now as a criminal courtroom prosecutor. And my allegiance was constantly questioned. Even though my victims were overwhelmingly Black or Brown, it seemed that my presence as a Black woman, by virtue of prosecuting Black and Brown people, was a betrayal to this very community. And it was this thought, this fallacy, that Black and Brown people can occupy but one role in the criminal courtroom, that of defendant and possibly as defense counsel. And so here I was, for the record, Jim, I was minding my own business in a restaurant, having my delightful cookie before the meal, as I often do, because I want to get to the good part. And I was approached by a defense counsel who just could not wrap her mind around the fact that I appeared to have the audacity to be a proponent of civil rights, or say that I was a proponent of civil rights. And yet I was standing where the stereotypical white man, or the man, is thought to stand as a prosecutor. And she and I believed we were both at the right seats at the table. She, because she was, in her mind, the only one who could be the effective gatekeeper and could stop an injustice. And here I was, somebody in a proactive position. And as a prosecutor, the idea of the amount of power that a prosecutor has. I mean, the fact that people believe you can either be a proponent of civil rights or a prosecutor is quite telling about how people trust or don't trust the system. And think about what a prosecutor is able to do. They're able to decide to charge or not to charge. They're able to question and have the healthy skepticism of any law enforcement official about their Fourth Amendment violations, potentially. You are the ones who hand out pleas, who indict through a grand jury, can recommend sentencing. The whole gamut of choices are made before a defense counsel is even able to try to react to them. And so I felt that it was important in that conversation. We never did come to a conclusion, but the conversation itself, I think, is so profound as to who has the right seat and where should those that believe in civil rights truly occupy. But really is a testament to just how perverse our notions are about who is entitled to be a champion, who is entitled to be a victim, and what we require of those who are there.
Now, of course, you say that the vast majority of the defendants were Black, but what about the victims?
They were as well. And that was the irony of it. Here I was thought to be, perhaps from some, as betraying a Black and Brown community because I was prosecuting Black and Brown people overwhelmingly. And yet the Black and Brown victims needed somebody to help to hold someone accountable as well. And we forget that idea in this quest about social justice and reform, which is extraordinarily important. The thought really pays very little attention to what victims go through, victimization, also victim blaming and shaming, and also how we prioritize how we approach it. And so it was always a sort of quizzical moment for me to be challenged in those ways and thought to confine our notions of justice just to the relationship between the person who is the defendant, presumed innocent, of course, and the prosecutors.
But as you know, our canons say that a lawyer engaged in public prosecutions is not supposed to convict the guilty, but to see that justice is done.
Yes.
Now, isn't there necessarily a conflict between seeing that justice is done and having kind of a civil rights approach to the criminal justice system?
I think it's sometimes thought to be a conflict, but really there ought not to be a conflict. I mean, to do and see that justice is done requires necessarily that civil rights be a part of it, that fairness. I mean, the subtitle of my book, A Black Prosecutor's Fight for Fairness, is quite intentional. It wasn't a pursuit of justice because that could often be not only elusive, but at times illusory. And that fairness, if it's not a part of the system, there's no opportunity for justice to prevail. And it really is more of an expansive notion, as you point out. And the idea of if the canon is to ensure that justice is done, that means that a prosecutor, whether people realize it or not, when you stand up and you say your name on behalf of the people of the United States or whatever jurisdiction, it necessarily includes the defendant, who is also a person within the United States of America and who you represent. And so you have this constant level of vigilance, this constant level of advocacy and realization that in pursuing justice, it does not mean that you are anti the presumed innocence. It just means that in carrying out and meeting your burden of proof to prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt, you have to do so within the confines of the Constitution and with an eye towards justice, not just an eye towards winning.
Now, you said that part of your job was to exercise discretion, make charging decisions, and often the charging decisions would impact the ultimate sentence. Certainly, you were negotiating plea bargains, and you were taking cases to trial. But in the context of the charging decisions and the prosecutorial discretion, there was tremendous opportunity to do justice, to fashion a disposition that would be fair to the government and fair to the defendant.
That's true. And I took advantage of those opportunities as well, not exploited them, but took advantage of opportunities to ensure that that was a keen opportunity to do so. But, our system is still imbalanced in the sense that we can't just say that because you're able to offer a fair plea means that you have done the work you needed to do to ensure justice. Because obviously, we have a presumption of innocence in this country, but it's one we must pay for through our bail processes, which means that people have a decisive advantage who are on the outside of a jail cell in preparation for trial or after a charging decision has been made to be able to participate meaningfully in their defense. If they do not have that opportunity, then they are wrestling with the idea of, well, I might be innocent. I might continue to profess my innocence. But at the end of the day, I have a cost benefit analysis. I've got a prosecutor offering this. I have the inability to remain in jail. I cannot, either for my mental health reasons or be able to withstand it, or I'm being harmed for some reason within the cells and the confines of these cells, or whatever list of reasons you don't want to be, which are very plentiful. You're tasking people with this notion of, well, as long as I have a fair enough plea, then I will just accept the fact that my name is on the other side of United States versus, and forget the presumption that really has not been truly extended. And so while I did make plea offers, we do so routinely. In fact, when a case comes to us, you almost immediately can hand over a plea because you want to give the most favorable one before an indictment, before any work is done, really, before the resources that are already limited have to be expended. And so it was such a matter of almost a routine notion that it's hard to really capture what fairness looks like in every plea, especially when you've got the presumption of innocence always with the sort of Damocles of, can I afford bail?
Yes. Now, our criminal justice system, quite sadly, is largely viewed as being racist. I mean, face it, the end result is the black population of our prisons, which are overcrowded. We're said to be an incarcerated society. Our record doesn't look very good, and a lot of the people who are incarcerated for nonviolent crimes or drug-related crimes, where they easily could be rehabilitated and be at home with their families and be productive. And you also have the question of bail, because it's not only a matter of race, it's a matter of economic standing, and poor people can't make bail, and so they're in prison, and there's a coercive aspect to that, so they want to plead guilty even if they didn't commit the crime and get the whole thing over with. And all that is said to be unfortunate. But when you were a U.S. attorney in Washington, the population of Washington was about roughly 50% black people and brown people, and also the police department, which was making the arrests, which were the feeder to the system, was also majority minority. About half the judges were black people or brown people, and probably half or more of the U.S. attorneys. So Did you see that system as being racist, as being disproportionate? Is there a correlation between the percentage of the population and the percentage you'd expect to see in the dock?
Well, I don't know that the numbers in terms of the statistics you've given are accurate. Certainly, we did not have half the U.S. attorneys of color in Washington, D.C. And I do know the larger point, and the judges as well, the larger point about it being skewed not as a reflection of the overall percentage in the country is accurate. So I think it is fair to say that if you cannot simply look at these issues of the correlation of race and disproportionate representation within our prisons as simply a factor of only white people being in positions of power. That really is far too reductive. And you'll find more cases than not as you realize that the color blue often trumps everything else, that a Black robe is oftentimes a continuation of the us versus thems, and the power dynamic at play is what really keeps the system as it is and the inertia of it. So I'm never reductive in the sense of thinking about this. The only way to change things is to have more people of color in positions of authority. Abuse of power is at the core of so much of this. Abuse of power related to things like socioeconomic status, like the geography of things like those who are represented and otherwise. All these things really have, race plays a role in all these things, but it's not enough just to have a physical mirror image between a defendant population and those in power to have change. As I've been precise, it's proponents and thoughts of civil rights that actually should rule the day. I know that the mascot of the Department of Justice, which I take issue with and always have, this idea of a blindfolded woman as the aspiration, as if to suggest as long as we don't see what's happening, everything else will balance out in the end, I think is naive and nonsensical. You have to actually see the impact of socioeconomic status, of race, of gender, of privilege, all these different aspects to understand how to make the system go from what it is on paper and the concept to what it aspires to be. But it's far too reductive to just assume that as long as you are Black in positions of power, that you will be able to never exploit one's power. I mean, there are a number of countries, as you know, that are also majority Black or brown, and there are powers and abuse of power throughout. If that was simply the formula, that as long as you had one who looked like you in power and those relatively powerless, everything's fine, well, we wouldn't have had half of the issues internationally that we have.
Do you take comfort from from events such as the nomination of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court, the convictions in the George case of the police officers, the convictions in the Arbery case, both in the state court and the federal court, by mostly all white juries? It seems to me that we're making a lot of progress in the criminal justice system.
There has been progress and the clouds do break up, but it's still overcast skies. I'm not saying I'm a pessimist, but I am somebody who is reality based. And those, frankly, each instance you've spoken about certainly can become that dot on the arc bending towards justice. And I think the compilation of everything and the culmination will show us what's really happening. But we've got a long way to go in the sense of realizing, well, first of all, it's 2022, and the first time a Black woman has been considered a nominee for the Supreme Court at this level has just come now, as if there has been this dearth of qualified and overqualified legal powerhouses before now. It's an embarrassment of riches to have even the pool of candidates that President Biden had to choose from, but also an embarrassment in a rich nation as we are, and the wealth and resource that we have before us, to have it just happen today. And the other instance is I am very heartened by the notion of this that often suggests that if there is a different race of a victim and a defendant, that depending on the race of the jury to whom they relate to, that will actually be the reason or the cause of the verdict. I was very heartened to see that 12 human beings saw that another human being was pursued and killed without justification and harmed in the way we have all looked at throughout the course of history. That is very heartening. But I also recall that there were several different prosecutors who had their hands on this case. And the only reason we ultimately saw this is because one of the own defendants provided a videotape believing he'd be vindicated in the end. And so certainly there has been moments of progress as you relate, but at times it has felt like one step forward, five steps back, just to try to drag the conviction of a nation to the words that we have said and hope they catch up. But I absolutely believe that we will continue to make progress. And I sometimes people laugh at what they perceive as a naivete when I'm optimistic. But I really believe that optimism is not the Achilles heel of progress. It is a requirement of it. Otherwise, what are we to do, Jim? Resign ourselves that the inertia will always stay in motion as it is? I have to believe there's progress. I'm a mother. I've got a 9-year-old son, a 7-year-old daughter. I refuse to believe that the world can change in a 2-year period, something as toxic as COVID-19, but can't change over the lifetime, something as beautiful as equal protection and application of the law and equality. So I stand strong. The clouds are breaking. It's overcast, but maybe the sun will break through, at least for my son and the collective sons out there and our daughters.
Well, it appears we're moving in the right direction. But another vignette in the book, which I found very moving, was the woman whose car was stolen, and she had to make a victim impact statement to the court. Black woman, black defendant, and she, instead of denouncing the defendant for stealing the car and talking about how it deprived her of her property for some period of time, presumably, instead she made a statement in support of the defendant. Tell about that.
Well, that was such a beautiful moment. And the book really has moments that can break your heart for the reasons that we're accustomed to, but also for the moments of breaking your heart open to see what the world has to offer as well in terms of compassion. And I think, punishment has become so seductive, Jim, that people believe that you have to make an example out of the person. They become the poster child of all that is wrong because we're so trained in a society to believe that accountability is only in the form of prison. We don't think about alternative drug treatment courts. We don't think about mental health the same way. And so, this story talks about a woman who had no intention of making a victim impact statement until she asked me the question of, well, who is this person? And I told her it was a, young 20-something young black man. And she saw a boy in that person and her own children who had been given second opportunities and second chances in a world that oftentimes only provides those exclusively to those who are not Black and brown. And she arrived with this almost like an aged jazz singer. I remember so well. And the presence not only was felt, but the presence of mind to understand the things we're talking about here today, Jim, the intersectionality of not looking at a particular case in a vacuum, but not wanting a part in ignoring how different choices have been made for him and by him to render him unable to have a second chance. And it was a beautiful moment where she spoke about the opportunities to provide those second chances. And it speaks a lot about the power of victim impact statements because the judge was so obviously moved by what she had to say. And one of the oddities is how few and far between those moments can be, that when they happen, they are so jarring as to jolt you into a better reality.
Okay, so I have a question for you, Laura Coates, because we've come to the end of this marvelous interview. How can we make the criminal justice system work for Black people and indeed for everybody else?
Well, we have to first consider that all the people that we put into demographic groups are all people. And the people of the United States are expected to be able to have the opportunities for due process, for fairness, and to have all that be a part of their pursuit of justice. And so the first thing we have to do, obviously, think about the ecosystem. It's not enough to focus on reform as it relates to the Fourth Amendment or police interaction. That's important, but also what the courts can be doing to not have this sort of judicially created doctrines of qualified immunity or the Graham versus Connor decision that talks about a reasonable officer standard versus a reasonable personal standard. All these judicially created not doctrines, essentially, they are not supposed to be insurmountable hurdles for accountability, yet they're treated so often as that by the increasing number of prosecutors who look at that and say, well, I can't do anything about it. I can convince a grand jury of everything, but apparently not that. Also looking at the ideas of how we can go away from a patchwork system of individual police departments having extraordinary autonomy with no national uniform standard and expect that the universal notions of fairness will actually preside. We have to get away from that. And finally, as just one of the examples, I recognize the power that prosecutors have and judges have. We have so much autonomy and agency, but not as many guardrails to ensure that there is uniformity in the application of the law. So much of it is based on subjectivity, and so much is based on decisions that are individually made. And I think if it's going to be on behalf of the people should be aware that there need to be greater guardrails of uniformity. Otherwise, we really won't have equal protection of the law.
Greater guardrails for equal protection of the law. Thank you so much for coming by, Laura Coates. This has been marvelous. Thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more conversations. I'm Jim Zirin. Visit our website at jimzirinconversations.com and be well, take care, and all the best.